I thought I owned my home until the ground beneath my feet started shaking. Walls cracked. Furniture moved. Something was alive under my house. And when I dug deeper, I found a secret underground train tunnel, built without my permission. But here's the twist. I legally owned it. And when the corrupt HOA tried to silence me, I turned their $1 million scheme into my own fortune. But they didn't go down without a fight. This is the insane true story of how I destroyed an entire HOA empire and made millions doing it. I used to love my house. It was my sanctuary. 15 years of memories, of watching my dog Max chase butterflies in the backyard, of lazy Sunday mornings sipping coffee on the porch. It was perfect until the shaking started. The first time it happened, I dismissed it as nothing. My coffee mug trembled against the kitchen table, just enough to make a faint clinking sound. Max lifted his head, ears twitching, but I waved it off. Maybe a truck had passed by too fast. Maybe the ground was settling. But then it happened again. And again. By the second week, it wasn't just a faint tremor. My picture frames were tilting on their own. The chandelier in the dining room swayed like it had caught a ghostly breeze. And worst of all, my sleep was ruined. Every night, at exactly 11:30 p.m., the shaking would return, stronger, more violent. My nightstand lamp fell over one night, shattering on impact. My walls groaned under unseen pressure. I could feel it beneath my feet, like something alive was moving beneath my home. I checked online for seismic activity in our area. Nothing. No earthquakes. No underground construction. My street, my neighborhood, everything should have been normal. But it wasn't. Something was happening beneath my house. And I was going to find out what. By the third week, my patience had run out. I mentioned the tremors to my neighbor Darren while we both grabbed our mail. He was an older guy, lived a few houses down, always quick with joke. But today, when I told him about the shaking, he frowned. "Probably just your pipes," he said, waving his hand dismissively. "Old houses make weird noises." "My house isn't old," I reminded him, "and pipes don't make walls crack." Darren shrugged. "Maybe check your foundation?" That night, I didn't sleep at all. I needed answers. The next morning, I called Eleanor Thompson, the president of our Pinehurst Heights HOA. If anyone knew about underground projects or city work, it would be her. I expected concern, maybe even a little helpful advice. What I got instead was indifference. "You're imagining things," Eleanor said flatly over the phone. I could almost hear her filing her nails. Houses settle, foundations shift. It's part of home ownership. "My house is 15 years old. Eleanor, not 100. I snapped. "And it happens on a schedule. Every night. At the same time." She sighed dramatically. "The HOA doesn't deal with private home issues. Maybe call a plumber?" Click. I stared at my phone. Something wasn't right. That evening, I caught Eleanor's black sedan driving slowly past my house. She stopped at the corner, holding up her phone, taking pictures of my property. The moment I stepped outside, she sped off. Why was the HOA suddenly interested in my home? The next night, the shaking was worse than ever. At exactly 11:30 p.m., a violent tremor jerked me awake. My bedroom wall let out a sharp, painful crack. A thin fracture splitting the paint from ceiling to floor. My nightstand toppled over, sending my alarm clock crashing to the ground. Max barked wildly downstairs. I rushed to check on him, my heart pounding. Then I heard it, a deep, mechanical rumbling beneath my feet. It wasn't just a tremor. It was movement. Something huge, something powerful was operating under my house. For the first time, I wasn't just confused. I was scared. The next morning, I made a decision. I wasn't waiting for answers anymore. I was going to get them myself. I reached out to a professional, Sam Miller, a geologist with 30 years of experience. He arrived with a truck full of specialized equipment, skeptical but willing to investigate. After a few hours of testing, Sam turned to me, his face pale. "I've never seen anything like this," he muttered. "This isn't natural. Something is moving underground." "Like what?" I asked. "A water main?" Sam shook his head. No, this is mechanical, repetitive. It's not city infrastructure, either. It's not deep enough for subway lines or sewer work. This is man-made, but someone spent millions building it. I swallowed hard. Millions? Sam agreed to return the next day with ground scanning equipment, the kind used for underground mapping. I barely slept that night, waiting. By the following afternoon, we had our answer. The scan showed a massive tunnel running directly beneath my backyard, a perfectly round, newly constructed passageway, extending far beyond my property. Sam was visibly nervous. "This isn't some small pipeline project," he whispered. "Someone built an underground tunnel big enough for a train, without telling you." I felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. Who would do this? And why? I immediately called my friend Raymond, a real estate lawyer. He listened carefully, then gave me news that changed everything. "They can't legally build under your property without permission," he said. "Under property law, you own the land from the surface down to the center of the earth. No one can dig under you without an agreement." "So that tunnel," I started, "it's yours." I felt a cold thrill of realization. That tunnel legally belonged to me, but that meant someone had built it illegally. That evening, I rented a mini excavator. If the HOA wasn't going to give me answers, I'd dig up the truth myself. Darren came over, watching in disbelief as I started clearing dirt in the far corner of my yard. 3 feet down, I hit solid concrete. We cleared more. The top of a massive tunnel emerged, a structure large enough for a subway. Then we found something even worse. A small metal door, with the HOA logo engraved on it. I stared at it, heart pounding. This wasn't city work. This was my own homeowners association. And they had built a secret underground tunnel right beneath my house, without my permission, without a single dollar compensation. And I was about to find out why. Darren and I stared at the HOA engraved metal door embedded in the tunnel wall. My hands felt clammy as I traced my fingers over the emblem. "What the hell is this?" Darren whispered. "Proof." I muttered, grabbing my phone and snapping photos. "The HOA isn't just involved. They built this thing." I barely had time to process the shock before my phone rang. "Eleanor Thompson, what do you think you're doing?" She snapped the moment I answered. "You need HOA approval for excavation." I looked up and saw her standing at my fence line, phone in hand, her face twisted with rage. "Funny," I shot back. "I was about to ask you the same thing about this tunnel under my house." For a second, she didn't say anything. Then her expression changed. The anger was still there, but now something else flickered in her sharp green eyes. "Calculation? That's city infrastructure," she said too quickly. "It has nothing to do with the HOA." I smirked. "Then why are you standing outside my house, watching me dig it up?" Her jaw clenched. "There's an emergency HOA meeting tomorrow night," she said, regaining her composure. "I expect you to fill that hole immediately and attend the meeting. If you have concerns, they will be addressed there." Before I could say another word, she turned and left. I exchanged a glance with Darren. "Did you see how fast she changed her story?" "Yeah," he muttered. "She's covering something up." That night, I didn't sleep. The tunnel was a mystery, but Eleanor's reaction? That was a threat. I needed real evidence. So Darren and I kept digging. By dawn, we had cleared enough dirt to pry open the metal door. It was unlocked. What if there's someone down there? Darren asked, hesitating. I ignored him. The door creaked as I pushed it open, revealing a narrow maintenance ladder leading down. I clicked on my flashlight. Only one way to find out. Climbing down was surreal. My boots touched the solid concrete floor, smooth and new. The tunnel stretched into the distance, dimly lit by overhead LED strips running along the curved walls. Then I saw it. Train tracks. My breath hitched. Darren dropped down behind me, his flashlight sweeping over the tracks. His face paled. This is a railway. A train tunnel. Under my house. And judging by the smooth rails, it was operational. I crouched down and touched the steel. It was warm. A train had passed through recently. I stood quickly. We need to go. Now. Darren didn't argue. We scrambled back up and sealed the metal door, burying it in loose dirt. That's when I heard it, a low rumbling, coming from below. We backed away just as the sound grew into a deep mechanical roar. The ground trembled violently. The train was coming. I ran inside, pressing my ear to floor. The unmistakable rush of a train speeding beneath my home. My own HOA had built an underground railway without my permission, and I had zero idea why. The HOA emergency meeting was packed. The entire neighborhood had gathered in the community center, whispering, exchanging confused glances. At the center of the room sat Eleanor Thompson, perfectly composed, flanked by her loyal board members. She tapped the microphone. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice. It seems we have a situation." Every head turned to me. Mr. Jackson has been conducting unauthorized excavation on his property, endangering community infrastructure. I stood up immediately. "Is that what we're calling it now? Community infrastructure? Because that's a funny name for a secret train tunnel you built under my house without permission." The room exploded. Shouting. Questions. People demanding answers. Eleanor's perfect mask cracked. "Please, everyone, calm down," she yelled, slamming the gavel. "This is a misunderstanding." I smirked. "Then you won't mind if I show everyone what I found." I walked to the front and handed out the ground scan images, showing the massive tunnel. Eleanor's knuckles turned white. Margaret Winters, Eleanor's assistant, stood abruptly. This was a community improvement project. The tunnel connects our neighborhood directly to downtown. It's for everyone's benefit. "Really?" I said, pulling out my property deed. "Because this tunnel runs under my home, and no one ever asked for my permission." The room went silent. Eleanor cleared her throat. "We assumed easement rights cover the underground development." I laughed. "Show me where in my deed it says you can build train tracks under my living room." Silence. Then came the bombshell. "We've invested $2.3 million into this project," Eleanor finally admitted. "The tunnel opens next month." The room erupted again. $2.3 million? Someone shouted. "Where did that money come from?" Eleanor didn't answer, because we all knew the truth. It had come from us. "What will it cost to use this tunnel?" An older woman asked. Margaret answered too quickly. "It's included in your HOA fees, of course." "That's not what I heard," I said, narrowing my eyes. "Darren, tell him what you found out." Darren stood nervously. "I was at the clubhouse last week when Eleanor was meeting with some homeowners from Oakwood Street. They were talking about membership tiers for tunnel access. Premium packages started at $500 per month." The room exploded. Margaret turned red. "That's a lie. The tunnel is for everyone." "Then why were you collecting special access fees?" Mrs. Henderson asked coldly. Eleanor banged her gavel. "This meeting is adjourned," she shouted. "The board will address individual concerns privately." As people filed out, Darren grabbed my arm. "Be careful," he whispered. "Margaret was taking pictures of your house this morning. They're planning something." That night, at 9 p.m., my doorbell rang. A man in a business suit stood outside, holding a folder. "Mr. Jackson, I'm Thomas Wright, attorney for the Pinehurst Heights Homeowners Association." He smiled coldly. "I have some documents you need to sign immediately." "What kind of documents?" I asked, not moving. "An acknowledgement of HOA infrastructure rights. Also, a non-disclosure agreement regarding the transportation project." I crossed my arms. "Not signing anything." His smile vanished. "Then, unfortunately, the association will have to take more formal measures." He handed me a paper, a violation notice, for $100 per day, retroactive to when I started digging. I clenched my jaw. They were coming after me, but what they didn't know was I was about to come after them. By the next morning, my house looked like a war zone. Bright orange violation notices were plastered all over my front door, mailbox, and even my garage. They were ridiculous. 17 separate violations. Grass 2 inches too tall. Unapproved mailbox color. Unauthorized pet height. Dog exceeds HOA size limits. I stared at the last one and laughed bitterly. Max, my Labrador, had been the same size for years. The message was clear. The HOA was playing dirty, but they weren't finished. When I got into my car to head to my lawyer's office, the engine made a horrible grinding noise. It refused to start. The tow truck driver took one look under the hood and sighed. "Someone put sugar in your gas tank," he muttered. "Engine's completely trashed." Sabotage. While I waited for a rental car, I checked my mailbox and found an unmarked envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Big, bold letters stared back at me. "Drop it or lose everything." My hands clenched around the note. They thought they could scare me into submission. They had no idea who they were dealing with. That afternoon, I finally made it to Raymond's office. He frowned as I laid everything out: the forged violations, the sabotage, the threatening note. "They're getting desperate," he muttered, flipping through the evidence. "That's a good sign." A good sign. I raised an eyebrow. It means they know they're screwed. I wasn't sure I believed him. The HOA wasn't just playing dirty. They were playing dangerous. On my way home, I noticed a black SUV following me. It stayed 3 cars back, always turned when I turned. When I pulled into my driveway, it slowly drove past. Margaret Winters was behind the wheel. She didn't even try to hide her face. She wanted me to know I was being watched. Fine, 2 could play that game. I installed security cameras around my property that night. If they wanted to spy on me, I'd make sure I caught them in the act. The next morning, Raymond called me with game-changing news. "They never actually filed for underground rights to your property," he said, his voice buzzing with excitement. "I checked the county records. The tunnel segment under your house legally belongs to you." I sat up straighter. "Wait, so I own it?" "Under state law?" "Yes. That tunnel was built without any permits and without your consent. If they want to keep using it, they have to go through you." The gears in my head started turning. "Raymond," I said slowly, "what if I file for official ownership recognition?" There was a pause. Then I heard him chuckle. "I like the way you think." By that afternoon, I had filed the necessary paperwork. In the eyes of the law, I now owned the tunnel section beneath my home, and the HOA had just lost complete control of their project. The next morning, my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. "Eleanor," I said before she could even speak. She inhaled sharply. "I see you've been busy. Figured I'd beat you to the punch." I leaned back in my chair, smirking. "You have no idea what you've just done," she hissed. "You think you won, but I promise you, this will not end well for you. Not for me, no. I agreed. But for you, I think it's over." She stayed silent. Then her voice dropped to a whisper. "We can make your life very difficult. More threats." I played along. "More difficult than sending security to harass me? Or ruining my car? Or keeping me up all night with patrol cars?" She didn't respond. I pressed forward. "Or how about the diverted HOA funds? Or the fraudulent contracts?" Finally, I had her. Her voice wavered. "What do you want?" I grinned. "I'll see you tomorrow at the HOA office. 10 a.m. sharp." I hung up before she could answer. For the first time in weeks, I felt in control. I arrived at the HOA office the next morning, but I wasn't alone. Raymond was with me, and so was a court reporter. Eleanor sat at the center of the conference table, Margaret beside her, flanked by 3 other board members. They all looked furious. "This is highly irregular," Eleanor said, eyeing the court reporter. "HOA mediation is a private matter." "I'm not here for mediation," I said, sliding a folder across the table. "I'm here to inform you that my ownership claim of the tunnel segment beneath my property has been filed and recognized by the county." The room went dead silent. Eleanor's lips pressed into a tight line. "And furthermore," I continued, "I'll need $5 million for easement rights, retroactive permissions, and compensation for damages." Her eyes snapped to mine. "You want how much?" $5 million. Non-negotiable. Margaret sputtered. "This is extortion." Raymond leaned forward smoothly. "No, this is property law. My client owns that tunnel segment. You built on his land illegally. The legal precedent is quite clear. Eleanor's nails dug into the table. "We'll make your life hell," she said softly. "We'll triple your assessment fees, fine you daily, force you out of your home." I smirked and gestured to the court reporter. "Every threat is being recorded." Her face drained of color. Raymond cleared his throat. "Additionally, we've contacted the city inspector about your unpermitted construction. He's very interested in how this project avoided municipal review." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "You have 1 week," I said, standing, "or I shut down tunnel access. Permanently." I turned to leave. As I reached the door, I heard Eleanor hiss to Margaret, "Find something on him. Everyone has secrets." I just smiled. Let them try. I knew Eleanor wouldn't just back down. She wasn't the type to lose gracefully. I just didn't expect her to make her boldest move yet so soon. That afternoon, I returned home to a massive crane blocking my driveway. A construction crew was setting up equipment in my backyard. "What the hell is going on?" I demanded, pushing past a group of onlookers. A worker in a hard hat turned to me with a clipboard. "Emergency utility repair, sir. HOA approved it this morning." "On my property?" He nodded, flipping the paperwork around. "Signed by the homeowner." I stared at the forged signature. It wasn't even a good fake. "You're trespassing," I growled. "Pack up and leave." He scratched his beard. "I don't know what to tell you, man. We have orders to dig." I yanked out my phone and called the police. By the time an officer arrived, the workers had already dug a 6-foot hole in my yard, conveniently right above the tunnel entrance. The cop took one look at the paperwork and shrugged. "Civil matter," he said. "Take it up with your HOA." I clenched my fists. Eleanor had pulled strings with city officials, but she had made a mistake. She was so focused on destroying my access to tunnel that she forgot about one thing. I had evidence of their illegal activities, and it was time to use it. That night, just as I was cooling off, my phone exploded with calls. I ignored them at first, but when my neighbor Darren called 3 times in a row, I picked up. "Dude," he breathed, "turn on Channel 5, right now." I grabbed the remote and switched on the news. The screen cut to a live broadcast outside my house. A reporter in a bright red blazer stood in front of my ripped-up backyard, microphone in hand. "Breaking news in Pinehurst Heights," she announced. "Local homeowner is holding his community hostage by refusing to cooperate with a vital infrastructure project." My stomach dropped. The broadcast cut to a press release from the HOA. Eleanor stood at a podium, looking calm and professional. "The accusations against me and my board are completely false," she said smoothly. "This tunnel was designed to benefit our community, and we had full transparency during its development." Then came the biggest lie. Mr. Jackson was aware of this project from the beginning. He even verbally approved it years ago. Now, he's demanding an outrageous sum of money to let the tunnel remain operational. My hands clenched into fists. Eleanor wasn't just playing dirty. She was rewriting history. And the worst part? People were believing her. The neighborhood forum was already blowing up with angry posts. "I can't believe he's doing this. Some people are so greedy. He's trying to extort the community." Then I saw the one that sent a chill down my spine. Maybe someone should teach him a lesson. The war had just gone public. The next morning, I met Raymond in his office. "They're turning the entire neighborhood against me." I muttered. Raymond, surprisingly, looked pleased. "Let them," he said, sliding a folder across the table, "because I just found something that will turn the city against them." I opened the folder. Inside were official city utility records. "What am I looking at?" I asked. He tapped the page. "That construction crew yesterday? They weren't city workers." I sat up straighter. They were private contractors, hired by Eleanor's husband's company. I stared at him. "You're saying?" "Eleanor's funneling HOA funds into her own family's business." He nodded. "Not just that. I did some digging into why this tunnel is so important to her. Turns out Eleanor and 3 city council members have been quietly buying up commercial property at the planned tunnel exit points." My heart pounded. This was never about a community project. I whispered, Raymond grinned. Nope. It was about real estate. The tunnel skyrockets property values at the downtown connection point. Once the tunnel opens, Eleanor and her investors stand to make millions. I exhaled slowly. They're trying to destroy me. I said, but they made a mistake. Raymond's eyes gleamed. And now we're going to bury them. That afternoon, I received a surprise visitor. A sleek black SUV pulled into my driveway. A woman in a sharp navy blue suit stepped out, holding a leather portfolio. She knocked on my door. Mr. Jackson? Who's asking? She handed me a business card. Madeline Carter, City Transit Authority, Legal Affairs. I blinked. The Transit Authority? She smiled thinly. Mr. Mallister from the city's transit department would like to meet with you. Why? She handed me a manila folder. Because that tunnel under your home, she said, it wasn't built for the HOA. I frowned. Then, who was it built for? She sighed. Let's just say Eleanor has been making deals she wasn't authorized to make. Mr. Mallister can explain the rest. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. City Hall. She turned to leave, then paused. And Mr. Jackson? Yeah. She glanced around, lowering her voice. Be careful. Eleanor's desperate, and desperate people make dangerous choices. That night, someone pounded on my door. I checked the camera feed. Eleanor, alone. For the first time since it started, she looked rattled. I opened the door, arms crossed. Brave of you to come here. Her lips pressed into a thin line. We need to talk. Before your little meeting with Mallister. I smirked. What's wrong, Eleanor? Nervous. She stepped inside, lowering her voice. $6 million. Cash. Today. Sign the papers, and this all goes away. I laughed. Why the sudden generosity? She didn't answer. Because the city's involved now, isn't it? I said, watching her carefully. Her jaw clenched. You don't understand. The timeline has accelerated. If you don't sell now, you'll get nothing. The city will just take it through eminent domain. I shrugged. Maybe. But before they do, they're going to ask a lot of questions about why a private HOA was building public infrastructure. Eleanor paled. You're making a terrible mistake, she whispered. I leaned in. How much was the city going to pay you for that tunnel? I asked softly. She stiffened. More than $6 million, I bet. The muscle in her jaw twitched. I grinned. Gotcha. I opened the door. You can see yourself out, Eleanor. She stared at me for a long moment. Then her mask cracked. For the first time, I saw real fear in her eyes. She left without another word. As the door closed, I exhaled slowly. Tomorrow, I was going to meet with the city, and when I walked into that office, I wasn't just fighting for my land anymore. I was going to end Eleanor for good. The next morning, I stepped into City Hall, my pulse steady but my mind sharp. Raymond walked beside me, briefcase in hand, looking calm and confident. Inside the transit director's office, a man in his late 50s with salt and pepper hair greeted us. Mr. Jackson, I'm Director Mallister. Please have a seat. I sat down, placing my folder of documents on the table. Mallister wasted no time. We know about the tunnel, he said, folding his hands together. I wasn't surprised. I assume you also know it was built without my permission? Mallister nodded. We suspected as much. The truth is, this tunnel is exactly what the city's transit plan needs. But Eleanor, she wasn't authorized to build it. I raised an eyebrow. So, you're saying the HOA built a city-sized transit tunnel without permission from anyone? Mallister exhaled sharply. That's what we're trying to confirm. We believe Eleanor forged agreements and misappropriated funds to construct this tunnel in secret, assuming she could later sell the rights to us for an enormous profit. I smirked, and then I ruined the plan by owning the most critical part. Mallister slid a sheet of paper across the desk. $8.7 million. The city's official offer. We'd like to purchase the underground segment under your property, he explained. This would legalize the transit project, but more importantly, it would permanently sever Eleanor's control. I didn't hesitate. I signed the deal. Raymond grinned as he handed Mallister the legal documents proving my ownership. Mallister shook my hand. You just delivered a fatal blow to Eleanor's entire scheme. I leaned forward. Good, I said. Now I want to watch it collapse. That evening, an emergency HOA meeting was called. The community center was packed. Neighbors murmured in confusion. Eleanor was already seated at the podium, her expression unreadable. As I entered, her gaze snapped to me. She knew something was coming. I took a seat in the front row, Raymond beside me. Eleanor cleared her throat and tapped the microphone. Thank you all for coming, she said, her voice smoother than ever. We are here to address the misunderstandings regarding the tunnel project. I leaned back in my chair, waiting. As many of you know, certain individuals have spread false information about our transit initiative. She glanced at me, and unfortunately, these baseless accusations have jeopardized an incredible opportunity for our community. People in the audience shifted, whispering. She continued, however, we are happy to announce that the board has secured new legal agreements. I stood. That's a lie. The room went dead silent. Eleanor froze. Excuse me. I stepped forward. The city just purchased my land rights. I announced, holding up the signed contract. That means the tunnel now belongs to the Transit Authority, not the HOA. The room erupted. Wait, what? The city owns the tunnel now? So, what was Eleanor trying to sell? I turned to the audience. For the last 2 years, Eleanor has been stealing your HOA fees to fund a project that had nothing to do with us. I explained. She built that tunnel to sell to the city for her own personal gain. Eleanor slammed the gavel. These are outrageous claims. I demand proof. I smiled. I thought you might say that. I nodded toward the back. The doors opened, and in walked 2 police officers. One of them stepped forward, pulling out a warrant. Eleanor Thompson, you're under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and illegal construction. The room exploded into gasps. Eleanor shot up from her seat, face pale. No, you can't do this. Save it, the officer said. We have financial records showing you diverted over $3.4 million from community funds. We also have evidence of property fraud. Margaret, Eleanor's assistant, stood up shaking. I didn't know about this. One of the officers turned to her. Actually, we have emails proving otherwise. You're under arrest, too. Margaret collapsed into her seat. Eleanor turned back to me. This is your fault, she spat as the officers pulled her hands behind her back. You think you've won? I grinned. I know I've won. And then, with every eye in the room watching, they let Eleanor out in handcuffs. In the days that followed, the entire HOA board resigned. The neighborhood was in shock. For years, Eleanor had controlled everything, dictating rules, raising fees, threatening homeowners. Now, she was gone, and we were free. The city finalized its transit deal, turning the tunnel into a legitimate project. It was even renamed the Integrity Line, a tribute to the battle against corruption. And as for me, I kept my home. Despite multiple offers to buy my property at premium prices, I refused to sell. Instead, I did something better. I invested part of my $10 million payout into a legal fund for homeowners fighting abusive HOAs, because no one else should ever have to go through what I did. 6 months later, Raymond called me. Eleanor and Margaret just took a plea deal. I smirked. How bad is it? 7 years each, he said, plus full restitution to the HOA. I leaned back in my chair. So, they have to pay back all the stolen money? Every last penny. I laughed. Eleanor had spent years terrorizing this community, hoarding power, abusing authority. Now, she was just another crook behind bars. That summer, we held a neighborhood barbecue. For the first time in years, people actually felt like a community. The new HOA president, a retired judge named Gloria, raised her glass. To standing up for what's right, she said, even when it seems impossible. People cheered. I looked around, at the laughing families, the grateful neighbors. And beneath my feet, the newly repurposed tunnel hummed with activity. connecting our neighborhood to the city. Just as it was meant to, my phone buzzed. A text from Raymond. Justice served. You did it. I smiled. Yeah, I did. Because sometimes the ground beneath your feet holds more value than you could ever imagine. For the first time in years, life in Pinehurst Heights felt normal. The HOA was under new leadership. Homeowners were finally free from insane fines, bogus rules, and Eleanor's reign of terror. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't over. I had won my battle, but there were thousands of other homeowners across the country still trapped in their own HOA nightmares. So, I decided to do something about it. With part of my $10 million settlement, I launched the Homeowners Defense Fund, a legal foundation dedicated to fighting HOA abuse. The response? Explosive. Within weeks, my inbox was flooded with emails. Please help me. My HOA is charging me $5,000 for planting the wrong flowers. My HOA president is forcing me to sell my house. They took my home over a $200 fine. The corruption was everywhere. And Eleanor Thompson? She was just one of many. So I made it my mission, exposing every single one of them. 3 months after launching the fund, I received an urgent call from Raymond. You're not going to believe this, he said. A group of homeowners in Silver Birch Estates just reached out. Their HOA is run by, wait for it, Eleanor's former business partners. I froze. How bad is it? Raymond sighed. They've been illegally foreclosing on homes and selling them for profit. They've evicted over 30 families. Rage burned in my chest. Eleanor might have been locked away, but her network of corruption was still very much alive. They need legal help, Raymond continued. We could take this on, but it's big, bigger than Eleanor. I didn't hesitate. Let's burn them to ground. Taking down Silver Birch Estates HOA wouldn't be easy. Unlike Eleanor, who relied on intimidation and fraud, this new group had money and power. They had high-powered attorneys, deep pockets, and political connections. But they made one critical mistake. They didn't know who they were dealing with. I assembled a team of legal experts and investigative reporters. We started digging into their finances, looking for any cracks in their empire. And then we found it. A secret slush fund. Millions of dollars stolen from homeowners, funneled into shell companies owned by the HOA president's family. It was Eleanor's playbook all over again. Only this time, I knew exactly how to take them down. The case against Silver Birch Estates HOA was explosive. When we exposed illegal foreclosures, embezzlement, and fraudulent fines, the media went wild. Headlines blasted across the country. HOA president under federal investigation. Homeowners fight back and win. Is this the end of HOAs as we know them? The courtroom was standing room only on the first day of trial. I sat in the front row, watching as the HOA president, Richard Blackwell, sweated through his expensive suit. His lawyer tried to dismiss the case, tried to bury the evidence, tried to silence the homeowners. But we had something they didn't expect. One of their own, flipping sides. A former HOA board member came forward, handing us smoking gun emails proving they had knowingly stolen millions. The judge's gavel slammed down. All assets are be seized, she declared. All affected homeowners must be fully compensated. And just like that, we crushed them. The Silver Birch Estates case became a landmark victory. It set a national precedent. For the first time, corrupt HOAs were being held accountable. And that was just the beginning. We started winning more cases. More homeowners took back their rights. More HOAs crumbled under the weight of their own corruption. And as for me, I didn't stop. I couldn't. Because every time we won a case, every time we shut down another Eleanor Thompson, another Richard Blackwell, I remembered how it all started, with a mysterious shaking in my house, a secret underground tunnel, a war I never asked for, but one I was born to win. And now, I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for everyone, for every family, every homeowner, every person who refused to be bullied. This wasn't just a personal battle anymore. This was a revolution. And we were just getting started.